Welcome back. Today we're diving deep into something absolutely critical for the clean energy transition. Lithium.
Hmm.
It's essential, right, for EV batteries, grid storage, everything. But the supply chain, well, it's straining and it demands a whole new way of thinking about where we get it.
How demanding is definitely the word. Our sources show we're looking at serious lithium supply deficits, maybe as soon as 2030.
Hmm.
And the real kicker, the way we get most lithium now for this green tech carries a pretty heavy environmental cost.
Exactly. Traditional methods, hard rock mining, huge energy use, huge water use. But even the famous Salar brines, those giant salt flats in South America, they look incredible, sure, but they guzzle something like 500 tons of water for every single ton of lithium.
And that level of water use, it completely changes the local hydrology, often in places that are already incredibly dry. So the point is to really secure the U.S. supply chain, cut down reliance on just a few spots globally, and, meet this demand more sustainably. We have to look beyond those virgin resources. We need secondary sources, things that maybe repurpose infrastructure we already have.
And that brings us right to the heart of today's deep dive. We're exploring a really breakthrough idea, something that flips the whole concept of waste on its head. We're talking about pulling battery-grade lithium out of wastewater, specifically the produced water from oil and gas operations.
Yeah, it's this fascinating intersection, isn't it? Two very different energy sectors kind of colliding.
We've got two key sources guiding us today. First, some big commercial news, a company that's actually hitting commercialization like right now. And second, a really detailed academic paper that digs into the science, which U.S. oil and gas regions are actually the best bet long-term, based on the geology and the chemistry. So our mission is to connect that immediate commercial race with let's say, the complex science that dictates where the real long-term potential lies. Let's kick off with the commercial story then. The first mover, the race to get this stuff deployed. This is centered around a company called Element 3, based in Fort Worth. They're all in on this specific process. And the big news, just last month, September 2025, they closed their Series A funding. Pretty significant round, led by Toho VC, with EIC Rose Rock and Cubic Capital as co-leads.
Yeah, and this isn't just, speculative VC money. This is deployment capital. This funding means Element 3 can get their first extraction plants built and running on Double Eagle's water infrastructure in the Permian Basin literally by the end of this year. They are moving fast.
And that speed, that's the headline here. It makes Element 3 the first new lithium player to actually reach commercial scale in the U.S. using this kind of resource. Think about that timeline difference. You've got other U.S. projects, hard rock mines, conventional brines. They're still tangled up in permits, planning, years, maybe decades out. Element 3, they're talking about shipping commercial product within months.
Right. Their CEO, Hoodwitson, talked about this exact point. He said they're building American lithium independence by being faster, cleaner, and more capital efficient. Why? Because they're essentially piggybacking on existing, already permitted oil field infrastructure. They're turning a liability into an asset, not digging a new hole.
And the sheer scale of that liability, this feedstock, it's mind-boggling. We're talking about produced water from oil and gas.
Yeah, it's generated constantly, every single day.
The numbers are huge. The U.S. oil and gas sector generates over 1 trillion gallons of this wastewater annually.
1 trillion gallons. It's just a colossal amount of water that currently costs a lot to get rid of, mostly through deep well injection.
Which, as you know, isn't without its own problems. That injection process can be costly, and it's been linked to induced seismicity, those small earthquakes in some areas. You're pushing huge volumes of fluid underground under pressure.
Exactly. So Element 3 is looking at this massive operational cost, this environmental headache, and saying, hey, there's value here. And estimates suggest that within that 1 trillion gallons of wastewater, there could be around 250,000 tons of lithium carbonate potentially recoverable.
Wow, 250,000 tons. Put that in context. How does that compare to the need?
Well, projections show the U.S. facing a significant lithium supply deficit by 2030. That 250,000 tons, that's more than half of that projected deficit. So they're taking this unconventional resource, this waste stream, and potentially turning it into a major domestic supply source without the years and billions needed for traditional mines.
And Element 3 isn't thinking small. Their stated goal is to be a top 3 domestic lithium producer within just 3 years.
It reflects the scale of the opportunity they see.
Okay, that potential is huge, definitely. But let me push on that a bit. That 250,000-ton number, that must assume you can get the lithium out efficiently from all that water, right? Yeah. Element 3 is starting in the Permian, specifically the Wolfcamp Formation. What are the sort of practical, on-the-ground challenges they might hit that could bring that big number down to earth?
That's a really important question, and it leads us straight into the science because you're absolutely right. Just having a massive volume of water doesn't automatically mean it's all good or easy or economic to process. Not all produced water is created equal.
Okay, so let's unpack that. If it's not just about volume, how do we figure out which wastewater sources are actually viable? What does the science say?
Well, the academic research lays out three really key things we need to look at together. First, the specific water chemistry, what's actually in the water besides lithium. Second, the production rates, how much water are we getting? And third, critically, geography, where is this water located relative to where the lithium needs to end up?
Right, and this gets us to what we could call the lithium paradox, maybe. The sheer volume of water, which is what gives the Permian that huge potential number we mentioned,
Okay.
it doesn't necessarily line up with the quality or the concentration of the lithium in that water.
Exactly. You see this right away comparing different formations. Take the Wolfcamp in the Permian, where element 3 is starting. Yes, it produces enormous amounts of water. That's why the total resource estimate is so high. But the average lithium concentration, it's pretty low, around 14 parts per million or ppm.
Okay, 14 ppm. Help us picture that. How does that stack up against other major plays?
Think of it like trying to extract flavor. 14 ppm is like using a huge amount of water to make very, very weak tea. Compare that to the Bakken Formation up north. That's closer to 27 ppm, roughly double the concentration. But the real standout, purely in terms of concentration, is the Marcellus Shale, mostly in the northeast. That comes in at around 84 ppm on average.
Wow, okay. So Wolfcamp, where the commercial leader is right now, has about one-sixth the lithium concentration of the Marcellus.
Pretty much, yeah. And the operational reality of that is crucial. For these lower grade brines like Wolfcamp, you simply have to process much, much larger volumes of water to get the same amount of final lithium product. That means bigger facilities, more energy, more reagents, just to get the same output you could get from a smaller volume of that richer Marcellus brine.
Okay, so low concentration is one hurdle. But that's only part of the chemistry story, isn't it? If we dig deeper, the really big technical challenge isn't just how much lithium is there, but what else is in the water fighting to get out.
Ah, yes. This is where the processing difficulty can really spike. It's about the other dissolved stuff. High. Total dissolved solids, TDS, is common. But specifically, it's the presence of other ions, particularly magnesium amiga and calcium K. These secondary cations, when they're present in high concentrations, they seriously mess with the efficiency of the lithium separation technologies.
We're talking about things like specialized adsorbents or membranes designed to grab the lithium ions.
Exactly those. You can kind of picture these separation materials like very selective bouncers at a club, right? They're designed only to let lithium, the VIP, through the door. But if you have tons and tons of magnesium and calcium hanging around these competing cations, they effectively crowd the entrance. They block the active sites on the adsorbent or membrane that are meant just for lithium.
So they literally clog up the works, making it way less efficient to grab the lithium.
They interfere, they reduce selectivity. It means your initial lithium capture isn't as pure. You then need more downstream processing steps, more chemicals, more energy to purify it to battery grade. And the academic paper specifically flags this as a major challenge for the formations element 3 is targeting initially.
The ratios of these competing metals to lithium are pretty bad in some cases.
Right. Yeah, they really are. The Bakken and Wolfcamp waters, the paper highlights them as the least favorable for easy downstream separation. Why? Because the ratios are just so high. In those brines, you've got magnesium levels anywhere from 40 to 100 times higher than the lithium. And calcium, it can be more than 400 times higher than the lithium concentration. Imagine trying to pick out your one VIP guest when there are 400 other people crowding the doorway.
Okay, that sounds like a purification nightmare, potentially very expensive.
Mhm.
So flipping that purely based on the chemistry, which brines look cleaner, easier to process.
From that chemistry angle, the clear winners are the Marcellus and also the Smackover formations, which is mainly in Arkansas and Texas. They just have much lower ratios of those major competing metals, magnesium and calcium relative to lithium. They're inherently cleaner brines to start with, and that translates directly into potentially lower separation and purification costs, less energy, fewer chemicals, maybe a simpler process overall.
So the science seems to favor high-grade and clean chemistry, pointing towards places like the Marcellus. But, good chemistry doesn't guarantee a successful business. If you can't get your final product to the customer economically, does that perfect chemistry even matter? Let's pivot to that third criterion. Geographic location.
Absolutely crucial, especially when you think about building a resilient long-term domestic supply chain. You've got to connect the dots between where the lithium is extracted and purified and where it's actually used.
Hmm.
And the biggest, fastest growing use for battery-grade lithium in the US right now, it's battery manufacturing, gigafactories.
Right. And we're seeing huge investments pouring into that sector, creating what people are calling the battery belt across parts of the Midwest and the South. That's where the demand is concentrating.
So when you overlay the geography, the Marcellus Shale looks pretty attractive again. It's geographically much closer to many of those key battery manufacturing hubs compared to, say, the Bakken. Lower transportation costs for the final lithium chemicals, simpler logistics. The Bakken, being way up north, just doesn't have that same proximity. That adds cost and complexity getting the product to market.
Okay, let's pull back for a second. We started this by talking about the environmental footprint of traditional lithium. So where does this wastewater extraction method fit in? Is it actually cleaner overall?
Well, the potential upsides are really significant. First, you're taking something that's currently classified and managed as a hazardous waste that produced water. Remember the issues with reinjection causing microseismicity? Processing it avoids that specific problem. You turn a liability into a potential asset. Second, the process of removing the lithium and often some of those other problematic ions like calcium and magnesium actually reduces the overall salinity of the water. This could open up pathways for beneficial reuse of the treated water, maybe for certain industrial purposes, or potentially even some types of irrigation, depending on how clean they can get it. That's a huge potential water win.
And fundamentally, it means less need to dig new mines, disturb new land.
Definitely, less pressure on virgin resources. But there's an important however here, linked back to what we discussed about concentration.
Right, the energy needed for processing.
Exactly, because these O&G brines are, generally speaking, much lower grade than traditional lithium sources like South American salars or hard rock ores, especially in high-volume places like the Permian. Getting that lithium out and purified to the very high standards needed for batteries might actually require more energy input and potentially larger volumes of chemicals for the separation and purification stages compared to processing higher grade conventional resources. We really need thorough life cycle assessments, comparing the entire footprint cradle to gate to fully understand the trade-offs. But the potential to use existing waste infrastructure is still a massive advantage.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this for everyone listening. It's a complex picture, isn't it?
Okay.
On one hand, you have element 3 in the Permian's Wolfcamp, clearly leading the commercial charge right now. They're leveraging that huge water volume and existing oil field setup to move incredibly fast and start filling that domestic supply gap. Speed is their edge. But on the other hand, if you look purely at the scientific criteria, this lithium concentration, the water chemistry, the geography relative to battery plants, the Marcellus Shale emerges as having perhaps one of the most attractive long-term potentials, even if the infrastructure to handle that water might take longer to build out.
It really highlights this tension between immediate commercial opportunity and the underlying geological and chemical realities. And that brings up a really fascinating point for the future. What happens as the technology evolves? Because this assessment, which locations are best, it's not set in stone.
Right.
If we see breakthroughs in separation tech, new adsorbents, new membranes that get much, much better at selectively grabbing lithium, even when calcium and magnesium are super high.
If the bouncers suddenly get way better at filtering out those 400 gate crashers.
Precisely. That kind of technological leap could completely change the economics. It could potentially make those currently challenging high volume but low grade brines in places like the Wolfcamp or the Bakken suddenly much more viable, much more competitive, almost overnight.
And that would fundamentally redraw the map for critical materials in the U.S., wouldn't it? Shifting away from relying only on concentrated, often environmentally taxing sources toward tapping into these massive distributed waste streams that we already manage. That's a pretty profound shift, turning something that costs billions to dispose of into a strategic national resource.
That's the challenge, definitely, but it's also the huge opportunity that's unfolding right now.
Really fascinating. We've gone from a funding announcement to brine chemistry to resource maps, all connected by this idea of turning wastewater into something valuable. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive and exploring these connections with us.
Yeah, we hope this gives you a richer picture of the complexities involved in securing these critical materials. Please do follow the channel so you don't miss out on our future insights.